Welcome to yet another episode of The Speaking Citizen. I am Mehru Jafar. Today, my guest is Danish Husain. Danish is an amazing actor, poet, storyteller, and award-winning theatre director. The Hoshruba Repertory, founded by him about 11 years ago, is in the midst of celebrations. It is performing a series of plays at the Mumbai Prithvi Theatre between September 12 and September 17. Tickets to each performance are selling out fast, and many of the 5 performances are already sold out. My first question to you, Danish Husain, is tell us, what does it mean to be a Dastangoi for life? Tell us what this breathtaking act called Dastangoi is all about.
I wish, Meru, I could claim to be a Dastangoi for the rest of my life. The actual Dastangos, the people who were in the yesteryears spinning these tales, which eventually become Tilisme Hoshruba and Dastane Amir Hamza, were people of a different breed. Because the art of Dastangoi is kind of misunderstood when you say it's an art of storytelling. It is not an art of storytelling. It is actually an art of anti-storytelling. The greatest skill that a Dastangoi could have was the skill of stopping the Dastan midway and then proceeding ahead with descriptions and keep the descriptions so engaging that they could continue for days and days without the story moving forward. Now, to have that kind of skill, and this particular skill of Dastangoi was called Dastan Rokna. कि आपने दास्तान रोक दी, the plot of the story stands still, and now the Dastangoi gets, he detours into various kind of descriptions, which has, at times they are connected to the story, at times they are segues into something completely random and different. But the idea was that within story, story within story, descriptions within descriptions, the Dastangoi could go on for days before the story could even proceed an inch forward. Now, this was the great skill. And to have this kind of a virtuoso skill, you needed to be like a repository of culture, of language, of history, to have that kind of skill to impromptu create a description, to impromptu create a narration, and a narration that can hold on for days, for hours, and keep the audiences spellbound. You need to have great auditory skills. We are modern actors. We don't have those kind of skills. No, we basically memorize text and then go and perform it. At best, the improvisations or the segues we do is 2 to 3% to 5% of the total text. But when we are talking of the great Dastangois of yesteryears, people like Sayyid Muhammad Hussain Jah, people like Ahmad Hussain Qamar. Ahmad Hussain Qamar was famous that he would, when he would be narrating Dastans to his scribes, who were writing down the tales that would be published by Naval Kishore Press, he would have at least 8 to 10 to dozen scribes sitting there. And to each scribe, he would be narrating a different story. And he would leave the story at one point and then move on to the next scribe and narrate a passage and then move on to the next scribe. And then after 10, 12 scribes, when he would return to the first scribe, he would again pick the thread of the story from the same spot from where he had left with the first scribe. I mean, that kind of skill is phenomenal. I don't think we can do justice to that. It would require a different kind of birth and a different kind of training from childhood and a different kind of engagement with language, with idioms, with metaphors, with poetry, with history and culture. So to put in perspective, actually the art of Dastangoi is the art of anti-storytelling and not so much storytelling. And it is these fascinating descriptions which really made them the great Dastangois. That's the reason why they were able to expand a story of Amir Hamza, which all over the world was roughly around 1,000 pages, into a mammoth storytelling of 42,000 pages, which got published over 46 volumes in 34 years from Naval Kishore between 1883 and 1970. So yes, I can only yearn and desire and wish to be like that. That is the ideal state to be in. But unfortunately, we're miles away from that.
So, what was the purpose of this exercise? Was it just time pass, or was it, uh, you know, giving you another kind of knowledge about life?
No, I mean, one has to understand the milieu in which things operate. The kind of milieu in which the storytellers were operating in 19th century, perhaps excellence was if you could expand and if you could say one thing in many ways. So if you look at the way literature was written in 19th century, and I think not just in our country, even in medieval times in other places, I mean, even when you read Shakespeare, there are descriptions and passages which are going on and on, whereas the central key thing that you could say could be summarized in 2 or 3 lines. But there is a whole flowery passage which kind of uses a lot of similes and metaphors and analogies, and the same thing is said in many ways. So it was a kind of a period where to embellish, to adorn, to expand was considered the key thing. It's like Mir Sahab saying ki ek phool ka mawzu ho to 100 rang mein likhun. It is something like that. The more, if you could expand the topic and can write in various ways, that was the skill. What happened with the change, with the change in technology, with the change in uh, uh, with the change of the century happening, the way the world was experiencing, a lot of things changed, and especially with the rise of short stories in the early 20th century, brevity became the art. That became the apogee of literature, to write something in concise forms, to write something. So we started moving towards what we understand as realism today, you know, like write like the way people talk these days, make it short. Nobody speaks like this. So this became the skill. This became the more appreciated part of it, and slowly and slowly we found that writing with embellishment, with adornment, went out of style. Nobody writes like that anymore. If you would send a copy to an editor these days, where you were writing in that flowery style, your copy editor would immediately start canceling things and says, no, 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 we can say this and less. So it's also the way what becomes more appreciated in a society, and that is transformed by various factors, by technology, by economic transactions that we are having, by cultural exchanges that we are having. Also, we were moving in modern times when suddenly to do more in less time became more important. So nobody had time to kind of expend their energies on something which can be understood in 2 lines. Nobody wanted to read 20 lines. And I think over the period, this whole thing went out of fashion, and it was no more appreciated as it would be appreciated in those years, in those times. So it's just the way those times were.
So the text called Tilisme Hoshruba, which was also put into words and printed by the Naval Kishore Press, is it very different to the Arabic version of the Hamza stories or the
Well, to be honest, no one has ever found an Arabic version of it. Everybody knows that the story originated in Arabia because Amir Hamza was the uncle of Prophet Muhammad. But there has never been a written or a manuscript of the Arabic version of the story has ever been found. The earliest versions which are found are in Persian, actually. So more or less, I think this Amir Hamza story originated or became a franchisee or a style of storytelling, perhaps in Persia. And Persian Empire was the biggest empire at that time in the medieval time. Its influence kind of went across Persia and to modern day Turkey, Syria, Iran, North Africa, Western Europe, Central Asia. Traveled uh, with the Mughals. It came to India, and it kind of moved on. I mean, right now as we talk, I think the week just went by. There was this huge conference on Amir Hamza in Tokyo, where all the Amir Hamza academics from all over the world gathered in Tokyo, and there were scholars who were talking about Amir Hamza, the Indonesian version, the Amir Hamza, the Cambodian version, the Chinese version. So that was the extent of Amir Hamza tale, traveling, that people were finding these tales in different other cultures being performed. So I think the earliest we could find is basically Persian, and when the stories reached India around 1801, when Fort William College opened in Calcutta, that's when Khalil Khan Ashk, who was a poet and a Dastango employed at Fort William College to teach Dastans to the young East India Company, um, recruits who were coming to India. And for the first time, 4 volumes got published in Urdu. So that's the first time when these stories came into published form in Urdu around 1801, 1802 at Fort William College. And then the next version we find published is somewhere in 1855 or something, when Ghalib Lakhnavi prints it. And then in 1869, we have Mr. Bilgrami, who kind of reworks on Ghalib Lakhnavi's version and reprints it. And then comes the Nawal Kishore version from 1883 to 1917, which expands this 1 volume of Urdu and makes it into a 46-volume tale. So, so this is roughly what the publication history of Amir Hamza is.
So how would you, because Tilisme Hoshruba Urdu version is quite exhilarating as a, to the ears, as a text. How do you compare the Persian version?
Hoshruba, I think never existed in Persian or Arabic. It was purely a creation of Indian storytellers. So Talisman Hoshruba came into existence for the very first time in Urdu and in Urdu itself. I mean, there was no version of the Lisme Hoshruba in either Persian tales or in any other Indonesian, Chinese, Arabic versions that you can look at. It is purely and purely an Indian creation by Indian storytellers. And yes, the language is very much similar to what the 19th century Dastan goes, the kind of Urdu that they were using. And most of these Dastan goes were actually Marcia goes in Lucknow. So, during Muharram and those 2 months and 8 days, they were possibly writing Marcias. And when Muharram would get over, they would get back to their bread and butter, which was writing Dastans. So you find a lot of similarity. The registers you find very common when you're reading a Dastan and when you're reading Marcias from the 19th centuries. You realize that how much these influences are overlapping.
So when you say the Indian version, you actually mean the Hoshruba tales as narrated in the Awadh area, maybe Lucknow, Rampur.
Yeah, when I say Indian version, I mean the whole Tilisman Hoshruba story was for the first time written and created by Indian storytellers.
Yeah.
I mean, they had taken elements of like there was Afrasiab existing, and there was Amar Ayyar existing, and there was Amir Hamza existing. These characters existed. There was Zamurrat Shah Bakhtari, the Laka, the king.
Son of Amir.
Yeah, so it's like somebody takes a popular franchisee which is running, and somebody takes characters from that. You take Harry Potter characters and you write 7 new volumes with the same characters. So it is something similar to that.
So moving on to your performances on stage, which are really spectacular very often. Like you're able to steal the show on stage as well as on screen. Tell us what it was like playing a sublime character, also very mysterious character like Shams Tabrizi, and your relationship, if any, to the great mystic Jalaluddin Rumi and to Sufism.
Well, I mean, the play Rumi Unveiled the Sun. it came to me first as a minor character. I had to play a minor character, and it so happened that during our rehearsals, uh, the gentleman who was playing Rumi, he had to leave because he got into some other commitment and he couldn't be part of the play anymore. So so Suhaila, the director, she asked me, should I play Rumi? But the Rumi part had singing involved in it, and I can't sing. And then and Orun Das, who was playing Shams, is also someone who can sing. So I think Suhaila, in consultation with Orun and I, we all felt that we should flip, and Orun, who was playing Shams, should play Rumi, and I should play Shams. And I think it worked out beautifully because Orun could sing and he could bring this a certain kind of a delicateness to the performance, a certain fragility to the performance, and I was able to adapt more to this rough edges that Shams had, this mystic wild man who could be unpredictable and who would say very profound things, and yet at the other instance could be very mocking and in your face, and be very madman like. And while we were doing the play, I got acquainted to Rumi's poetry, and I got acquainted to their relationship. And of course, it pays that your mother is a Persian professor. So, I could go back to her where she could read Rumi in the original Persian and explain it to me, the philosophy of Shams. And in some sense, I remember it was very transformative because I don't know. I mean, it's long back when I did the play, 2006, 7. So it's like 15, 16 years now. But whatever that period was, all I recall from that period was that I was in a very agitative state personally. And the process of going through the play of Shams, of Rumi, and playing Shams was a very calming effect on me. Suddenly there were things which I imbibed and which kind of changed the way I would look at world. I remember there was a dialogue from the play where Shams says, "Hunger is the best medicine," and that dialogue has stayed with me till now. And I realized how profound that dialogue is. I mean, hunger is not here just said in a physical sense. It is also in a very metaphorical, in a very figurative sense, as to eventually what drives us to achieve anything is hunger, you know. So uh, if you really want to cure yourself of things that you want to achieve, or the despair that you're living in, or the frustration that you're not able to do things, and if you induce a hunger inside, that might be just the best medicine for all your pain and despair, and eventually that hunger will push you to do things and achieve things that you've been looking for. So I remember it was very calming and very transformative, and in some sense I thanks to that experience came out as a wiser man.
Mm-hmm. So, and what is what do you think? How did Shams disappear from this world? Did he go back to Tabriz or?
Well, I don't know. It's a lot of a speculative history. So, and it's too old for any kind of clarity in records. Some people say he was murdered, he was killed. Some people say he vanished. Some people say, but I mean, given that he was such a prominent figure, there is no reason that he would just vanish like that. I mean, I very strongly believe the possibility that he was murdered.
By Rumi's son, or
I
by
have, yeah. I mean, again, that's very speculative. Is it Rumi's son? Is it the establishment at that time? Is it the religious establishment which felt he was too much of a threat in Konya to the religious Muslim order? So I mean, again, it's something that I'm not so well researched or read to kind of comment on. But whatever I've read and whatever I've known, it certainly feels that he was murdered.
Mm. So in today's time, when it seems diversity is less and less appreciated, what relevance and future does one of the many Indian languages like Urdu have today?
Well, the thing is this, that a lot language, I mean, language in itself, language per se, we're not just talking about Urdu language. Languages are fluid. They evolve with every generation. They change with exchange. They change with the era. So this idea of languages being pure or languages being fixed and static in time is completely a misplaced idea. Languages were never like that. Or since inception, since humanity's dawn, since we started speaking, we whatever language we have invented, we've spoken, has been transforming along with us. Some died, some stayed back, and a lot of what language stays and what language dies depends upon who is in power, what is the dominant culture. So there's this great JNU professor, I've forgotten his name, who was in the linguistics department, who used to say that difference between a language and a dialect is that a language is a dialect with a gun in its hand. So eventually, whoever is in the dominant culture and whatever their language is the language which will come to dominate everybody else. That's the language which will survive. The reason why English is today such a dominant language, because of the English imperialism that happened. If the French imperialism would have succeeded over English imperialism, perhaps the French influence would have gone beyond what it is today. Or if the Spanish conquistadors would have gone across the world and would have captured the way the British did, perhaps we all would have been speaking Spanish instead of just South America, Cuba, and Spain. So I'm saying that same goes with Urdu. I mean, Persian language had such a strong hold because Persian Empire in the medieval times was such a powerful empire, and that's why Persian became a lingua franca for such a huge range, geographical extent of people. Uh, so similarly, there was a phase, and Urdu is uniquely a very uniquely placed language in the sense that Urdu, perhaps, in my understanding, is the only language in the world which flourished when the culture it's supporting was collapsing. Most languages, they flourished when the culture, when the milieu supporting it was flourishing along with it and gave the power to the language. But Urdu is such a unique language that the very ecosystem that was supporting it was collapsing when Urdu, the language, was flourishing. So you see that much of what we understand as modern day Urdu starts somewhere around late 17th century, early 18th century, and flourishes and is at its zenith in the 19th century. And then the decline starts happening. But if you look at the period of Indian history, from the subcontinent's history, from late 17th, early 18th century, this is the last years of Aurangzeb, and then the Mughal Empire is falling apart. And then there are these series of invasions taking place, whether it's Nadir Shah, whether it's Abdul Shah Abdali, whether it's Suraj Mal Jat. So the place which is the center of Delhi of Urdu language, which is Delhi, is being ravished by it's being ravaged by these marauders, and still the language is flourishing. And I think when you look at the concept of Sheher Ashob in Urdu poetry, and when you see Urdu poetry at times despairing and there is being too much sorrow in poetry, it reflects the time when these poets were living in. So, what my point here is this: that a language which survived even when its ecosystem was collapsing and has been able to survive and live till now, there is no reason why it won't live. And I think it may not. I mean, it has been. It's not that what is happening to Urdu today is happening in last 8, 9, 10 years. Urdu has been neglected right from independence. I mean, the fact that in 1969, when centenary celebrations of Mirza Ghalib are being held in Delhi, a poet like Sahil Ludhianvi goes and says ki, उर्दू जिसे कहते, गालिब जिसे कहते थे, उर्दू ही का शायर था। उर्दू पे सितम ढाकर गालिब पे करम क्यों? So I'm saying that someone like in 1969, where possibly Urdu was much more prevalent and thriving than what it is doing today. 54 years back, a poet of Urdu is standing up on the dais and speaking to the establishment and saying that, you know, what right you have to celebrate an Urdu poet's life if you yourself have been decimating this language since 1947. So I'm saying that it may not find a favorable place here, but it would find other places in the world where people would embrace this language. And even in this country, in spite of all the effort, you know, when Rekhta started organizing its festivals, they just turned out to be the biggest Urdu festivals anywhere in the world. I mean, we can say that Pakistan's national language is Urdu, which is again as misplaced as, you know, saying that Hindi is the national language of all of India. But even they had to admit that Jasne Rekhta is perhaps the biggest Urdu festival organized anywhere in the world. So I'm saying that what is the politics of the day may not necessarily be able to influence what eventually the culture will be.
Mhm.
This is something that we will only be able to know in hindsight.
Exactly.
And a lot of these things, they survive organically. They find their ways in. It's like a river which will find its path. So the river of language will find its own path, and it will be embedded in some. I mean, you look at Marathi; it has so many loan words from Urdu and Persian. I mean, today when Marathi people speak, they use so many Urdu words and Persian words. And when I point it out to them, they are surprised. They say, "No, this is Marathi." But I say, "But the origin of the word that you're saying is this word. Now you have embraced it and you've made it into a Marathi word. But the fact is this, originally this word is coming from somewhere else." So I'm saying that this is how languages work. They intermingle, they entwine with each other, they sometimes diverge, sometimes they come together, sometimes a new language comes out of it, and it'll just carry on. And each age will find their own words and their own languages.
So while Urdu was in trouble in Delhi in the 18th and 19th centuries, it found refuge in Lucknow. So it was able to survive because language is not only about vocabulary and words, it's also about the way you use the words. So the way Urdu is spoken, for example, a lot of people lament the death of that way of using vocabulary that was such music to the ears as it was spoken in the Awadh area.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. I mean, because of the Nawabs coming in power and that period of 60, 70 years before Wajid Ali Shah was deposed, gave this small, you know, lease of life to Urdu and patronage to Urdu, which resulted in Urdu. And also there were the smaller, you know, dynasties and fiefdoms around which were patronizing Urdu, and because of that, Urdu could survive. And even when 1857 came in and there was a clear policy to kind of marginalize Urdu, Urdu kind of still survived till, you know, way into the 20th century. So I think uh, again, you know, things which come up organically, it's not easy to uproot them. You know, it is what is forced upon people, what is invented and imposed upon people, that is much difficult to kind of get adapted. But something which is brewing organically and is being accepted organically by people is very difficult to uproot.
So, which brings us to one of the most beautiful words in the Urdu language, which is, I think, Hoshruba, amongst thousands of other words. What is the idea of Hoshruba, and why do you call your theater group Hoshruba
Well,
Repertory?
Hoshruba in plain simple sense means jo aapke hosh uda de, something which enchants your senses, which steals your senses. And when I decided to open a theater company, I was looking for an appropriate name, and I thought, yeah, why not Hoshruba? I mean, that's what I perform. That's what I tell people from stage. Why not just extend this idea of Hoshruba? And and yes, that's it. I just decided to keep it Hoshruba Repertory.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The name is so beautiful. And my last question to you, Danish, is do you ever get the feeling these days, especially, that your freedom as an actor, your profession as a film and theater personality is threatened in any way?
No, not really. I mean, I don't feel it personally, but I think the content makers do feel the heat of censorship. And there is a lot of self-censoring happening when contents are being produced. And I think censorship is not something which artists really worry about, because great artists find ways of saying what they have to say. I mean, if one has to look at censorship, then the greatest example of our age is Iranian cinema, and it has produced for literally 5 decades now some great cinema, in spite of whatever the censorship should be there. So I think you look at the literature in Pakistan, which has come post Zia-ul Haq era. So I think uh, artists who are truly contemporaries, who are truly married in finding a unique perspective and placing it across to the world, would find ways of doing that. They would not be limited, shackled, because one must understand censorship and imposition and brute force always and necessarily is accompanied by lack of imagination. It follows the same copybook rules which fascist or people who've been censoring have been doing it for ages. But artists actually are people full with imagination, and they will always find to triumph over lack of imagination and say things in a way which will completely confound or perplex or nonplus senses. So I think all artists kind of relish that kind of situation.
On that optimistic note, Danish, I thank you very much for talking to The Citizen and wish you all the best